Seattle, a city praised as the shining jewel of America's West Coast, where skyscrapers cast their reflections on shimmering waters, where lush green parks stretch for miles, and where Amazon and Microsoft have built global technology empires. This is the promised land for dreams of a better life, a place where thousands from all over flock in search of opportunity. Yet just a few streets away, that glamour falls away like a curtain torn open. Beneath damp bridges, inside old, worn-out cars, or down dark alleys, tens of thousands of people struggle every single day to survive. On one side, luxury apartments with gleaming glass windows. On the other, faded, makeshift tents braving the wind and rain. Seattle is not lacking in money. What this city lacks is compassion and genuine care. This is not just a housing crisis, but a stark warning about the fading of humanity in the heart of a wealthy metropolis. And right here, in the city nicknamed the City of Opportunity, thousands still sleep on the streets, in cars, or huddled under overpasses awaiting for the day when fairness and kindness return. Stay with us through this video to uncover the truth behind the glittering lights and hear untold stories from the margins of Seattle. Seattle, the jewel of the Pacific Northwest, where the economy booms with an annual GDP exceeding $400 billion, where giants like Amazon, Microsoft, and Starbucks have turned this city into a global symbol of technology and opportunity. From towering glass skyscrapers reflecting the sunset over Elliott Bay to cozy corner cafes, Seattle seems like a promised land for those carrying dreams of a new life. But just step outside the radiant downtown, and that sheen quickly cracks. A cold, hard number. Nearly 12,000 people have no home to return to. They live in flimsy tents that storms can easily sweep away, in musty, aging cars, or huddled under bridges where the roar of passing trucks thunders above their heads. In one of the richest cities in America, these lives persist in the shadows of its own prosperity. In downtown Seattle, along the riverfront, tent encampments cluster together like patches sewn onto a luxurious carpet. The smell of garbage, mud, and mildewed fabric hangs in the damp, cold air. From afar, they look like dark stains forgotten amid the sparkling lights of office towers. On Capitol Hill, the number of people sleeping in cars has surged as apartment rents soar without restraint. The dim lights of old garages or the windows of abandoned houses have become temporary roofs for those trying to hide from the world's gaze. Meanwhile, in South Seattle exists a community of hidden homeless people who don't appear in any official count. They crash on friends' couches, squeeze into narrow, dark alleys, or camp on vacant lots, entirely beyond the reach of support or oversight. Behind these statistics are real lives. More than 4,000 children in Seattle are growing up without a home. By day, they carry backpacks to school, trying to appear as normal as any other kid. But when night falls, they return to a harsh reality, a cramped sleeping spot inside a car, the harsh yellow of streetlights replacing bedside lamps, the sound of the wind replacing a goodnight wish. Then there are the elderly, many experiencing homelessness for the first time when living and medical costs far exceed their modest pensions. They shuffle along freezing sidewalks with oxygen tanks and walkers, battling Seattle's brutal winters where low temperatures, combined with relentless rain, seem determined to drain the last bit of warmth from their bodies. It all paints a picture of stark contrasts. On one side, luxury apartments with rents high enough to buy a house elsewhere. On the other, fragile tents braving the storms. On one side, tech offices standing empty at night. On the other, families crammed into old cars. The homelessness crisis in Seattle not only exposes deep economic inequality, but also sounds the alarm on the erosion of compassion in a city that once prided itself on being a place of opportunity for all. People often hear on the news that homelessness stems from unemployment, addiction, or mental illness. But those are only easy explanations, like a thin veil of mist covering the depths of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lie the real causes, complex, intertwined, and deeply embedded in the social fabric that are truly driving thousands in Seattle to lose their homes. First comes the skyrocketing cost of rent. Seattle has been undergoing gentrification. Old neighborhoods, once home to low and middle-income families, are reborn into upscale residential areas with stylish coffee shops, boutique stores, and luxury condominiums. Waves of real estate speculation have widened the gap, turning housing into a tool for profit rather than a place to live. The result, affordable apartments have vanished from the map. Today, a small, modest apartment in downtown Seattle rents for over $2,000 a month, a figure that even many middle-class families struggle to afford, let alone those earning minimum wage. Countless families are pushed out, drifting to far-flung suburbs or, worse, onto the streets. Alongside this is the severe weakening of healthcare and mental health services. Once seen as a lifeline for those struggling to stay afloat, the system has been continually stripped of funding. Psychiatric hospitals have closed, addiction treatment programs have shrunk, leaving behind a deadly gap. Thousands of people carrying psychological trauma, neurological disorders, or substance dependencies are abandoned. No place to receive treatment, no follow-up, no long-term support. They drift on the streets, fighting alone against physical and emotional pain, becoming invisible figures in society's eyes. And while support is already fragile, mainstream media has helped widen the gap between the public and the homeless. Instead of analyzing systemic causes, such as unjust housing policies, unstable labor markets, or the withdrawal of social services, the press often stops at cold statistics or a few shocking images. This oversimplification makes it easier for the public to fall into harmful stereotypes. They're lazy. They brought it on themselves. They don't want to change. These seemingly harmless phrases act like knives cutting through the already fragile thread of empathy. The homelessness crisis in Seattle, therefore, cannot be reduced to the story of individual people not trying hard enough. It is the product of an unjust system where the housing market operates without restraint, healthcare and social services weaken, and public discourse shifts the blame onto those least able to defend themselves. In one of the wealthiest cities in the United States, this paradox not only reflects economic inequality, but also rings an alarm about the fading of compassion and communal responsibility. In theory, shelters in Seattle are built to be places of refuge, helping the homeless escape the wind and rain and regain a minimum sense of safety. In reality, many have become another form of constraint, causing people to hesitate before even stepping through the door. Living conditions are the first barrier. Most facilities are overcrowded, with mats so close together they're barely an arm's length apart. Privacy is almost non-existent, and the sounds of snoring, coughing, or arguments echo through the night. Hygiene is a constant battle. Bathrooms are rarely clean, blankets are thin, and many places are damp or infested with insects. In winter, not every shelter has enough warm blankets for everyone. Safety is also not guaranteed. In such cramped environments, conflicts can easily erupt, from small verbal disputes to real acts of violence. Theft is common, from shoes and phones to the most valuable possessions for the homeless, identification papers and medications. Residents sleep with their bags clutched to them, one eye open. Then there are the strict rules, meant to maintain order, but which inadvertently turn the shelter into a harshly regulated space. Curfews require everyone to be back by a set time, regardless of work schedules or personal circumstances. Pets are not allowed, even though for many, they are the only companions keeping them mentally alive. No alcohol, no cigarettes, rules that might make sense on paper, but when applied rigidly, make many feel punished rather than helped. Worse still, there are cases of charitable exploitation. Some organizations receive substantial funding yet provide only minimal services, even charging low market rents for shelter spaces, turning so-called assistance into yet another burden. The result is that many choose to return to the streets, where they can set their own rules, keep their belongings with them, and at least avoid imposed restrictions. Even in the face of freezing rain and lurking danger, they feel it is the last shred of freedom in a life reduced to the barest margins. In this painful paradox, Seattle still glows with lights every night, but for many, that light never reaches the place where they sleep. In Seattle, life on the streets is already harsh, cold that seeps into the skin, unending rains, and scarcity in every aspect. But for many unhoused people, that is not the whole story. Added to it are the cleanup campaigns periodically carried out by the authorities, operations promoted as efforts to tidy up parks, sidewalks, underpasses, or public lands. The goals sound reasonable on paper, but in reality, they resemble raids more than aid measures. These campaigns often take place early in the morning, when fog still clings to the streets and most unhoused people are clinging to the last moments of fragile sleep. The heavy footsteps of enforcement officers, the sound of tents being ripped apart, and the curt, cold commands all signal a day beginning with loss. The few belongings they own, warm blankets, coats, sleeping bags, are seized or thrown into garbage trucks. More devastatingly, medications, IDs, and sometimes the only keepsakes from their past vanish within minutes of chaos. The immediate consequence is the loss of basic survival tools. The confiscation of a sleeping bag means facing the night's cold with only thin clothing. Losing IDs can prevent entry into shelters or the ability to apply for work, while losing medications can lead to worsening illness. These damages cannot be easily measured in numbers, yet they leave deep scars in already precarious lives. Beyond personal loss, these cleanups drain public budgets at alarming rates. Tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent on mobilizing police, equipment, and cleanup crews, funds that could otherwise be invested in affordable housing programs, community health care, or rehabilitation support centers. Instead of addressing the root causes, these resources are diverted to short-term measures that only change the city's appearance for a fleeting moment. Worse, forced displacements push unhoused people farther from the city center, away from the very services they rely on. Soup kitchens, free clinics, showers, or volunteer distribution points. In outlying areas, they are forced into more dangerous conditions, vacant lots, abandoned parking structures, or distant overpasses, where there is no medical oversight or security. Risks of robbery, violence, or accidents increase, while access to help becomes almost non-existent. Under the guise of maintaining urban order, the criminalization of homelessness has turned victims of social injustice into people treated as criminals. This not only erodes trust between the community and those surviving on society's margins, but also deepens the prejudice that they are a problem to be removed rather than human beings in need of help. And while the main streets remain brightly lit at night, on the city's edges, lives pushed further into the shadows find it even harder to return. Seattle, a city celebrated as one of America's leading economic and technological hubs, hides a harsh reality. Not everyone with a job here can afford to keep a roof over their head. Statistics show that nearly 1 in 7 workers earns less than $15 an hour. In a place where the average rent for a small apartment exceeds $2,000 a month, such income is swallowed almost entirely by housing costs, leaving nothing for food, healthcare, or other essentials. Just one small disruption, a surprise medical bill, an unpaid week of sick leave, or a terminated contract, can send their lives spiraling into homelessness within weeks. For those without degrees or highly specialized skills, job options are often limited to physically demanding, low-wage work with little to no benefits or health insurance. This is the group most vulnerable when the market shifts. Losing a job means losing the ability to pay rent, forcing them out of their homes and into a search for temporary shelter. Once a permanent address is lost, the path back into the labor market becomes steeper than ever. No access to showers, no stable transportation, and no proper clothes for an interview. Together, these factors form a wall that is nearly impossible to climb over. When the roof is gone, mental stability quickly collapses as well. Life on the streets means daily exposure to harsh weather, constant insecurity, and the fear of being attacked or losing the few possessions one has left. Loneliness and despair creep in, leading many to turn to alcohol or drugs as temporary painkillers for the mind. In reality, about 40% of the homeless population in Seattle struggles with alcohol or substance abuse. But the critical point is that not all of them were addicted before becoming homeless. Many began using substances only after they had been pushed to the very bottom, as a way to momentarily forget the bone-deep cold or the endless nights without sleep. The tragic chain of losing a job, then a home, and finally one's mental stability is not an isolated story. It is a downward spiral swallowing thousands of Seattle residents every year. It makes clear that the problem is not a matter of individual effort, but of a brutal labor market and a welfare system too weak to catch those who fall. When a full-time job still cannot guarantee a roof overhead, even the hardest working individuals can find themselves curled up under a damp awning in one of the wealthiest cities in America. Losing a home is not merely losing a shelter, it is the loss of the most basic foundation of safety, dignity, and health. Without 4 walls for protection, people are more vulnerable than ever to violence and theft. Sleeping on sidewalks or under bridges means living in a state of constant alertness, never allowed to fully relax, not even in sleep. Seattle's harsh weather, endless rain and cold that seeps into the bones, brings higher risks of respiratory illness, skin diseases, and infections. while access to medical care is almost non-existent. Many face premature death, not from age or congenital illness, but because the merciless living environment has stolen years they should have had. The impact of homelessness does not stop with those suffering on the streets. It leaves a deep imprint on the entire social structure. Seattle presents a glaring contrast. Multi-million-dollar luxury apartments stand just steps away from rows of makeshift tents. Office towers of tech giants continue to rise, attracting top talent and enormous capital, while across the street, families struggle daily to pay rent, and many others have already been pushed outside. This juxtaposition not only reflects the income gap, but also lays bare the divide in how society treats different classes. As the gap between rich and poor widens, the sense of community, once a strength of Seattle, begins to erode. Residents of the two worlds rarely intersect, leading to distance and indifference. On one side, affluence makes it easy to forget the existence of those fighting to survive. On the other, the feeling of being abandoned and pushed to the margins fosters a simmering resentment that sometimes turns into anger. This is not merely an economic split, but a collapse of human connection, the very element that sustains the stability and resilience of a community. Seattle was once hailed as the city of opportunity, where anyone could rise if they worked hard. But the current reality shows that opportunity is shrinking and being distributed unfairly. When makeshift tents appear right under the shadows of gleaming glass towers, it is not just a visual contrast. It is a warning that unless homelessness is addressed at its root, this fracture will continue to spread, threatening the unity and stability of the entire city. Amid the bleak picture of Seattle's homelessness crisis, there are still quiet but steadfast beacons of hope: the volunteers and community organizations. They are often the first, and sometimes the only, line of aid that people living on the streets can count on. Without loud slogans, they show up with hot meals on cold, rainy nights, thick blankets to help endure the chill, and dry clothes to replace soaked garments. Some groups even operate mobile shower units, giving the unhoused a sense of cleanliness and comfort, something seemingly small but an invaluable boost to the spirit. In addition, they provide legal counseling, help restore lost identification, or resolve disputes, opening doors to social services once again. Beyond immediate aid, many neighborhoods and grassroots groups have joined forces to create small housing cooperatives. These are safe, affordable spaces built from the compassion and contributions of local residents, without waiting for approval or direction from the authorities. Though modest in scale, these initiatives prove that when larger systems fail or abandon those in need, communities can still find ways to help each other. Every room and roof built through collective effort carries with it a story of trust and shared humanity. Such efforts not only provide tangible assistance, but also ignite hope, something cold statistics and rigid policies cannot easily achieve. They stand as living proof that even in the darkest circumstances, compassion and community strength can create points of light. Seattle may be grappling with a major crisis, but somewhere, amid wet streets and makeshift tents, there are still hands reaching out, gripping tightly to those on the brink, pulling them closer to a life with hope. To break the cycle of Seattle's homelessness crisis, change cannot rely solely on long-term government plans. It must begin with each resident, with small but persistent actions, and with the understanding that this is not someone else's problem, but a shared responsibility of the entire community. We must dismantle the deeply ingrained prejudice that homelessness is simply the result of laziness or personal failure. The truth has shown that the root causes lie in an unjust system, where the wealth gap widens and access to housing and basic services grows ever more limited. Real change can only happen when the community stands united, asking frank questions and demanding clear answers from those in power. Why does a wealthy city like Seattle allow thousands to live in makeshift shelters? Why can't housing policies protect hardworking people from the risk of losing their homes? And why are massive public funds being spent to clean up the city's surface instead of addressing the root of the problem? We cannot let those questions fall into silence. Concrete actions are needed: supporting affordable housing programs, joining or contributing to community aid groups, and advocating for policies that ensure the voices of the most vulnerable are heard. Every roadside tent, every tarp under a bridge, is a living testament to policy failure and a reminder that the wealth gap is not an abstract number, but a daily reality. When we act together, as individuals, community groups, and social organizations, we are not only working to resolve a crisis, but also rebuilding the foundations of compassion and collective responsibility. A city is only truly prosperous when no one is left behind. Although homelessness in Seattle has been discussed and highlighted for years, most current solutions remain unsustainable and fail to address the root causes. To change the situation, the city needs a comprehensive, strong, and long-term strategy, one that integrates housing policy, social services, and active community participation. One of the most urgent and critical solutions is to expand affordable housing. Economists estimate that Seattle needs to build at least 50,000 affordable units within the next 5 years to meet the needs of low-income communities. These are not just numbers, but real homes, places where families and individuals struggling with living costs can find stability. If implemented effectively, such projects would significantly ease the pressure on shelters, which are constantly overcrowded, while providing residents with a solid foundation to reintegrate into society. In parallel, Seattle can learn from other cities that have succeeded with the Housing First program, a model that prioritizes providing permanent housing to homeless individuals first, then following up with support in healthcare, mental health, addiction recovery, and job training. Numerous studies have shown that this approach not only reduces homelessness, but also cuts costs for the healthcare, law enforcement, and public service systems. When a person has a stable home, their chances of maintaining employment, recovering their health, and avoiding relapse increase dramatically. Another essential factor is expanding mental health services. Around 30% of Seattle's homeless population lives with psychological or mental disorders. Providing accessible treatment centers, appropriate therapies, and regular care is absolutely necessary. The city government needs to collaborate with nonprofit organizations to bring these services closer to communities, rather than forcing those in need to navigate their way to already overwhelmed facilities. Legal assistance also plays an important role. Many homeless individuals lose their identification or face disputes over housing or employment contracts, but cannot afford a lawyer. Providing free, accessible legal counseling will help them protect their rights and open up opportunities to escape homelessness permanently. Finally, there must be increased federal investment through direct funds for programs addressing homelessness. This funding should not be limited to Seattle, but extended to other major cities where the crisis is severe. Resources could be allocated to nonprofits and community projects to provide essential services and build stable housing, rather than focusing solely on short-term measures. If these solutions are implemented in a coordinated way, Seattle could not only significantly reduce its homeless population, but also become a model for other cities in combining sustainable policy, social services, and community strength to tackle one of the greatest humanitarian challenges of our time. The homelessness crisis in Seattle is not the result of laziness or a lack of personal willpower. It stems from deep inequalities, a system riddled with flaws, and the erosion of compassion in community life. When housing costs soar out of reach, social services shrink, and the wealth gap grows wider, thousands living in tents, under bridges, or in cars is no longer surprising. It is the inevitable outcome of a society that has not found a way to protect its most vulnerable members. Yet, amid the heavy gray tones of reality, there are still streaks of light. These are the stories of volunteers who tirelessly deliver hot meals on cold, rainy nights, of community groups building housing cooperatives out of compassion, and of individuals quietly offering blankets, dry clothes, and a sincere word of care to the homeless. These acts may not transform the entire picture, but they remind us that kindness still exists and hope has never been completely extinguished. Now is the time not only to observe, but to act together. Share this story so more people become aware of the issue. Leave a comment, contribute ideas, and help bring the voices of the homeless into the light. Only when the community speaks out, demands change, and joins together in practical action can Seattle truly become a city of opportunity, a place where no one is left behind, and everyone has the right to live with dignity and hope.